Hello everyone, welcome to NAMM 2021 Virtual. Today a really exciting conversation all about immersive mixing techniques in ELISA with a really exciting front house engineer, educator, and all-around great human being from the turquoise gemstone state of Arizona, Robert Scovill. Thank you for joining us.
Wait a minute, I thought we were the bolo state.
You are
is it a bolo with a turquoise coin on it or a stone on it or something?
You're right, it's the bolo tie state, and officially I think it's the Grand Canyon state as well, so...
Where you can get probably Grand Canyon bolo ties with turquoise stones in them. That's probably how it's going to work around here in Arizona.
Exactly. How are things with you, Robert, down in Arizona? All is well?
Yeah, it's going good. Yeah, I mean, we're just all trying to get through this thing, obviously, and just trying to stay busy and... You know, it's all happening online. I think I've probably gotten to know more people through all of these online conversations than I ever did while I was touring. So that's been part of it. Yeah. It's been really fun. So.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. A lot of aspects of taking time to really start thinking again about new aspects, whether that's sound related, whether that's reading new books, whether that's listening to new music. I've grown my vinyl collection by a magnitude probably in the last 12 months.
Yes.
So. And my wife and I have a passion for vintage vinyl, so we go to the sales and try to pick up the original 1950s, 1960s kind of.
Man, clearly you and I need to go shopping. I mean, come on.
Estate sales, they're great in California right now. So.
Oh yeah. Nice.
Sorry. All right. So today we're talking about immersive mixing, and Robert, I don't know that there are many people more qualified to talk about how mixing has evolved over the last 30 years. Your career from mixing bands, you toured with Tom Petty and Rush and others, correct?
Yeah.
And
indeed, I've kind of seen a lot of console growth. I've seen a lot of workflow growth over end up dating myself here over 40 years now. So. Yeah, I've seen it kind of run the gambit so far.
And interestingly, you've seen like almost every aspect of the sound system evolve from the types of microphones used and to what we do now, the types of recording equipment, the types of consoles, the types of PAs. And I find it interesting. The one thing that really hasn't evolved until most recently is let's say the format or the design of the PA.
That's a great point. I mean, that's a great way to state it, that the format hasn't really changed. I mean, we've had this kind of evolving, I shouldn't say, not de-evolving, but not really evolving format. Everybody has just kind of conceded to work in either mono or stereo, over these years. There's never really been too many other options, short of the wall of sound and some of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I always find it fascinating, especially now that we've started to talk immersive and stuff. The live environment is really cool in that you can, especially with immersive now, you can make soundscapes as big as you want to make them. You're not limited by stereo in any way, shape, or form. So.
And I think it's an interesting aspect too, because I said this before. If anyone watching today and joining us today at NAMM has seen me speak before about this topic, we do these amazing things with loudspeaker technology and consoles from Avid and others, and speakers and amplifiers from Acoustics and others, to make the most pristine signal quality possible. And most of the time, you just said something that triggered me. We mix in mono or mostly mono. I think you call it narrow stereo, or
wide mono.
Wide mono. There you go. Wide mono, right? I mean, when you talk about the amount of pan you use on a hi-hat, it's what about, that's about the extent of it. And the reality is we end up putting the same signal in two speakers that are perfectly coherent and make a beautiful signal. And if you're not sitting in that perfect spot in the middle, it's not a very good experience for that signal, right?
For that signal, for sure, yeah.
And, there's a scenario where we know this as live engineers that there's a challenge in how much panning you can do in a stereo PA, ultimately because of how much audience really gets to hear both sides of the PA. Mm-hmm. And the challenge of what timing artifacts, all these other things.
Yeah, I think the nuance of it that gets lost a lot of times, because we've spent 20 plus, 30 plus years now comparing the mixing experience and the listening experience to our listening experiences at home or in the studio, etc., where propagation times are really small.
Right.
Propagation offsets between the left and right speaker are very small. in those situations. Even in a theater where we might go see a movie, which is obviously not in stereo anymore, but even those propagations are very small. But you get out into live concert sound, and even stereo opens up a whole world of challenges in terms of even impulse and frequency response coverage for the audience. You know, I mean, it just does. It's just a matter of sheer physics, you know, where we can get, you know, cancellations because of different arrival times between the left and right, all the way down through the frequency band. I mean, it can be completely broadband depending on those offsets, because we end up with 70, 80 feet between the left and the right speaker, you know. So it's just physics, you know. So, you know, in terms of just, which I'm sure it's a word we're going to talk about today, because I think it's a great one to use when we talk about these kind of discussions, is one of resolution, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, with these immersive environments and this concept of mixing immersive, really one of the main positives of it is we're increasing the resolution of the signals that are exiting the PA for a much larger percentage of the audience.
Yeah, you know? I always talk about, you know, to me there's multiple dimensions in sound, right? There's some obvious ones, which is amplitude, how loud is it, right? There's frequency response, you know, what's the response of it, and there's also position. In the real world, we have that information of positional information for a signal. And in a PA, we effectively eliminate that function. I mean, even if you pan something substantial, if you're sitting far house left and most of it's coming out of house right, you still ultimately hear it come from one speaker or the other predominantly, right? Like it very much pulls your attention one way or the other. So you've taken this whole dimension and flattened it. And I think that's interesting, because when you start to add a third dimension of that sound, let's call it that position dimension, that location dimension, the importance of the other two becomes slightly less, right? Like it's not nearly as important to master and perfect to a nth degree of those, because you have added, you know, another bit of information that you can use. Mm-hmm. Not to say that they're not important, right? Like it's just, to me, I definitely feel that there is a value of immersive mixing, of object-based mixing, that means that you can spend a little bit of money, a little bit of time, a little bit of effort on that, and that'll get you better dividends than if you try to optimize the last 4% of your mic placement, right? Not that you shouldn't.
And again, I think it's I'll call it a nuance argument, just because we haven't really discussed it for years on years, but we seem to kind of undervalue or maybe underestimate the impact that going to see somebody perform something and hear it. You know, we've kind of marginalized that whole experience with stereo for so many years, you know. And when you go see something that's an immersive, where you have positional information, where you see someone on stage and you get the feeling that you're hearing it come from that position, how much more engaging that experience is, as opposed to just watching some performers perform it
and hearing it
and listening to it in stereo.
Yeah.
You know, just like if you were watching somebody perform and listening to it come out of your Bluetooth speaker next to the swimming pool, that, you know, your brain doesn't really handle that all that well, you know.
Well, and it's interesting.
And I think we've kind of brushed that off for many years at live performance, you know.
And your brain has to put that back together, which to me takes a certain percentage of your brain power. That means less of it's paying attention to the experience you're in, right? So you get distracted by oh, my brain's got to put visual and audio together. I can do that. We're all trained highly to do it. And I'll tell you at home, if you're listening to this and we're talking about this, the first time you experience it, it's kind of an eye-opening experience to like realize that change, especially at scale. It's one thing to
it's mind-opening. Honestly, it's not just eye-opening. I mean, it's mind-opening, where all of a sudden the experience is very different. You know, it doesn't take a really discerning ear to see and experience the difference of it, but it takes the performers in front of you plus the audio.
Yep, it's,
you know.
You know, a couple of years ago, Robert, we got to go to a show, and there were two drummers on stage, and I remember that show. I remember that from a show. I said it after the fact, is like I could tell that the drummer on stage left was brushing clockwise, and the one on stage right was brushing counterclockwise. I don't know if I could actually hear it, but I could see it, and I could hear the sounds of those brushes moving, right? And I was like, I could tell the difference, right? And I could tell the difference not just in the middle, but
I mean, that show, that Bon Iver show was, for me, probably the biggest endorsement of immersive I've ever experienced. Because I'll just say it up front, as an engineer, as a mixer, especially live, if you've ever tried to mix two drummers in stereo, I mean, you got your hands full to try to create separation, tonal separation, dynamic separation, to be able to understand what those two players are doing. Man, that is a handful on its own. And at that show, I mean, because they had the drummers out left and right of each other, because that's kind of where they were on stage. And I remember walking that venue and listening and just thinking, I can tell what either one of those drummers are doing at any given time. I mean, it was so beautiful. I could not get my head around it. It was just so great.
Yeah, and it was really an interesting aspect, because I got to hear that same show, or a pretty similar one, 3 days before at the Hollywood Bowl, which is a perfectly beautiful PA and stereo. You know, it's about as good as it gets of a stereo PA in an outdoor venue. And like you said, I had a seat just off center, and it sounds much more like one drummer versus two, right?
Right.
You know, and it's like, I couldn't tell, because they play so much music together as two drummers that really makes a really big single kit at times. And I know the music, and I just couldn't perceive that. I went to the center in mix position. It was glorious there, right? I went and stood behind the front house engineer, and Sandy was killing it that night in stereo. But the headroom was just so much more when we went to that next show in Eliza. It was quite interesting. You said something though about, you know, hearing the two drummers, hearing the mix, hearing the separation, hearing this. How do we achieve that? Is that just space? Is there other things that we find that with? Like, how do we get to that?
Well, I think it comes down again to that thing of, in stereo, this is always, again, kind of the nuance. And even when I go to talk to other engineers and kind of present this at seminars and stuff where we've talked, you know, the subject of immersive has come up. I'm amazed how many people have this kind of light bulb moment where you start to realize that in stereo, right, the center image, which is crucial in big scale live sound, that center image is created from two speaker systems adding together, right? So if you're off center of that addition point, full bandwidth, the things that are in the center are being kind of cut to death frequency-wise. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the best example I've given, even in those seminars, to somebody where they kind of go, right, I know what you're talking about now, is when I say to them, have you ever mixed off center?
Yeah.
Just off center.
Just.
Not right in front of one array, but in between one array and center. Have you ever mixed there? Then you'll totally understand what I'm talking about now, because vocal, snare, kick, bass guitar get chopped to death in that position. You know?
Yeah, and so, like, you know, do you find it's easier, harder to build them? Pardon me. It's easier, harder to build that mix in traditional wide mono mixing, or in immersive audio. I mean, there's different things to think about, right? There's new ways you have to think.
I mean, I think, I'll be totally square with everybody. I don't have a ton of experience mixing in immersive in a big environment yet. I mean, I want to do it like nobody's business, but I have obviously tons of experience mixing in stereo. And again, you know, because so many of the mixing techniques that we've adopted in live sound over the years have their genesis in the studio. I mean, where they're mixing to to that format of stereo. We've kind of just morphed those and made them our own in live sound. So there are techniques to do that. And so much of it, especially in modern mixing, is bus driven, bus compression driven, you know, trying to get the dynamics of that song to fit in a very short window, a window which we really don't need in live sound. I mean, here we are trying to squeeze all this stuff into a dynamic range on the console so that we can send it out to something that is almost infinitely dynamic. You know, I mean, the dynamics range of PA systems is enormous.
Sure.
Comparatively, you know, acoustically, you know, I'm talking about. So, you know, it's a very different deal to try to kind of do that stereo mix and get it to come up there versus immersive, which is it's not bus driven, which as we'll discover here, you know, I mean, it's all object based things going up into that environment. So you really kind of have to, I'm scared to say this because I think it's going to get interpreted the wrong way. You need to learn to listen differently and have a different expectation, you know, and you kind of need to separate these two ideas a little bit, where you're going to say, I'm going to take my live show and make it sound like the record, right? I don't want to say you're going to dismiss that. You certainly want to honor that, But using the same techniques in the live show now, it's like, look, we can move beyond that. Now let's just make the live show the biggest, most glorious thing we can imagine, right?
Sure.
And have it honor the recording if we want to do that. But it doesn't have to have all the same techniques into it, etc. It's a much more organic experience and immersive than it is, you know, kind of a produced experience, audio-wise in stereo, you know.
So you said something before, and I think it's worth, like, let's go ahead and define it a little bit. We've talked about objects, we've said immersive, and I think we should clearly define an object, because it's a kind of a new thought in sound for sure for live. It's been around for a bit in cinema sound and other environments, but an object of audio is a channel, a bus, a stem. It's a piece of audio. It's a signal. It could be a single mic of a singer. It could be a stem of an effects return, you know, that has metadata that includes information about position. And position we can think about as lateral pan, vertical pan, and even in a lot of immersive environments, including Eliza, distance or depth. And then we also generally have enhancements to the spatialized audio, and that can start with something like width. And width is applying maybe a mass or a volume. Volume is probably a bad word for sound to use.
Yeah, I like calling it weight.
Oh, weight.
You know,
yep.
That it applies some weight to the signal in the spatial.
Right. And it's interesting because a good width parameter, like the one in Eliza, for instance, doesn't change the tonal response, but it changes the spatial response. Right, so it doesn't,
right.
And that's an interesting aspect, because you can give something a bigger feeling in dimensionality without necessarily just turning it up or giving a shelf on the low end, right, to make that weight exist more. And so if we talk about how we interface objects into speaker systems, right, this is where Eliza comes into play. This is where Avid S6L comes into play. You send X number of channels of buses out of the S6L to the Eliza processor, and the Eliza processor can handle 96 inputs, and it outputs to up to 64 speaker sends. So we could do a pretty complex design. Most live ones, like the one we were talking about with Bon Iver a little while ago, I think we technically used 9. It was 7 main arrays, a sub feed, and a front fill feed. So that's pretty simple in a lot of ways. But we can also do immersive designs with 30, 40, 50 speakers all around and even above.
Yeah. And I think it's, you know, at least I've found this in the discussion that this concept of object mixing, when we start applying this to live sound, right, there's when you're trying to explain it to someone or kind of get them engaged in the conversation, there's this temptation to immediately jump to 360 surround. Yep. 360 degrees of immersion. And how will we use that in concert sound? Do we really need that in concert sound? So I just for my own organizational thoughts in it, I try to break it up into front field immersive and surround immersive. Now they can be connected together and usually are connected together. But for the most part, and I'm going to narrow this down to just talking about live performance of musicians on stage, okay? In that situation, the vast majority of the work you're going to do is going to be front field immersive. Mm-hmm. And so the question becomes, well, why do you call it immersive if it's only front field? Because there's a depth aspect to it that we don't really have in stereo. I mean, we can kind of simulate it. But there's also this positional aspect to it where we can have things show up acoustically or from an audio perspective, very precisely tied to what we see on stage, you know? And it's not based on an addition or subtraction of one or two speakers, right? There's a number of speakers across the front, and we can place something in much higher resolution across that field because of the spatialization. Yeah. Right? And those objects that we talk about now, remember, there is no such really thing as pan because you have multiple speaker systems up there. It's not stereo per se, but it's the same sort of feel to it where I can position something on the left or position something on the right, or position something in the center. The difference being when I position in the center, it's not the summation of two speakers. It's being delivered by one set of speakers.
What?
So I'll just finish by saying, with that in mind, keep in mind objects coming off the console can be an individual channel, which the vast majority of what you're going to see today and hear today from me is individual channels. It can also be summations, you know, through a bus. It can also be a stereo return, and that becomes one of the more challenging kind of, mind-bending things of it's like, well, what does stereo mean coming out of 5 speakers?
Right.
Is that even make sense anymore? Do we actually do things in stereo? And I think one of the things you'll see is that, actual mono sources make a lot more sense in immersive than stereo sources many times, So, again, it's going to kind of change not only how we mix, but how we even decide what our sources are going to be for that environment, right? So object-wise, it can be lots of different things coming from the console, but the main difference is there is no master mix bus. Right? The PA is the mix bus.
Right.
I mean, I guess you could look at it that way, right?
Well, and I would even say that not even just the PA, but the environment you're in. Because the mix bus is going to be inherently unique for every single individual in that venue who's sitting in a uniquely different spot and here's a unique different arrival of all these unique sends, right? Yeah. And so that master mix is happening through the air to their ears for that person specifically. So if we want to sell this, good marketing again here, we've created 10,547 unique mixes for the audience as opposed to just one.
But that's important in live, especially in large scale live, because those 10,500, whatever you said, people all have a different visual perspective at the show.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So if I'm somebody that's sitting, way off to the side, and I hear the guitar player coming from the other side of the room, well, guess what? That's where I see him as well. Right? So even though it might be, I don't want to call it wildly out of time, but even if it might be out of time of the stuff that is closer to me in the PA system, my brain is going to say, that's okay. I get it. I understand.
Let's go ahead and pivot into dynamics. Robert, you're a master of many things. And one of the things that you've taught me over the years is the different techniques and styles for parallel compression. I've watched your videos about it before. You've shown me in person a few times. How is that world different now when we talk objects versus buses?
Yeah, it's honestly, it can be really challenging depending on what you want to do, right? Because, I think with parallel compression, you need to kind of really need to start with the idea of why did we do parallel compression in the first place, right? And it is, and let's just take the simple example, it's probably going to be the example I show you here today as much as anything, is, things like drums, things that have high transient response, and there's a lot of distance between a peak information and the RMS information of a drum, let's say. If I want to close that gap, I have historically had 2 ways to do it. Well, I'll call it 3 ways. One is a little dicey. One is I can compress the drum itself and shrink it down, but now I've made it sound kind of unnatural by any stretch of the imagination. I've taken away that peak element of it. The other piece of it is we have a tendency sometimes to do that with equalization. Like if we have a snare drum's a great example of where we have a snare drum that might be very bright, but it's primarily bright because its peak information is high frequency information, right? So we'll have a tendency to attack that with amplitude and say, okay, well, let's darken down that snare so we can turn it up farther and not have it be so offensive. Especially true in large scale sound reinforcement that's going to be loud. But the third approach, which is the parallel approach, right, is to say, okay, well, I'm going to let that source sound stay full range, meaning have the peak information, the RMS information. But now I'm going to take a highly compressed version of it that has all that peak information pushed down very close to the RMS information, and I'm going to push that right up with it now. And the overall response, the total response of that is I've raised the RMS, the total perceived RMS of the drums, right? And really all of that was driven for so many years in the studio to get things to set big and fat in a short dynamic range so that I wouldn't kick the mastering cutter needle off of the vinyl, right? When it's cutting the vinyl, I can't have this dynamic range when I'm cutting vinyl. It's going to kick the cutter right off the spindle, right? So, we've grown accustomed to that sound over 40 or 50 years of whether it's tape compression that has kind of given us that parallel bump, or it's, it's actually titled, right, New York style parallel compression, which is a parallel compression that is not only compression, but also equalization and tape saturation, and then that is pushed up underneath the source, right? That's the hardest one that you have to achieve in in immersive mixing and object mixing because you have no bus, right? There is no bus to mix to. And, you know, even in the studio today, we have this concept. I think Sheps is probably the biggest proponent of it, or I've seen him talk about it the most, is this concept of a P-bus, where we have an entire music mix that we're going to parallel compress and put in a parallel compressed version of the entire mix underneath the regular mix, right? As we stand today, I mean, that is almost impossible to do in object-based, right? Because it's all individual sources just flying up into the PA system. So you kind of have to pick and choose where you're going to parallel compress and how you're going to do it, right?
Sure.
So in terms of how we do it here, I mean, we got some nice things on S6L now that just released in our latest version. And, you know, really, to some degree, we were trying to address this kind of challenge in immersive as well. So I'll show that to you first. Let's just get to an input here where I can show. Let's just go to bass guitar or snare drum. So in our world now in snare drum, if you wanted to parallel compress right on the channel, you have the ability to do it. So if we were to insert a compressor on it, you notice there's a percentage attached to that. So if you wanted to do a 50-50 percentage of compressed and uncompressed snare drum, you can do it right on the channel, right? So you can have a heavily compressed.
Got it. It's kind of it's almost like a wet dry mix, if you will.
It is exactly a wet dry mix.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So you could do that right on the channel and experience that concept of parallel compression on your object that is going into the immersive environment. So that's certainly one way to do it, for sure. We give you a very, very easy way to do that. And the nice thing is we give you the ability to do that on noise gates as well as equalization. So even in equalization, it works kind of like a scaler, right? It's not necessarily parallel equalization there, but it works as a scaler. It works absolutely fantastic.
Interesting.
So this applies also to outputs. So even if you were going to create a drum bus, maybe you're going to say, okay, I'm going to create a parallel drum bus. Maybe I'm going to send kick, snare, toms to it. Well, if I send it to that subgroup, that is now my object that is going to the PA, right? Or to the immersive environment. Well, if I can either say I'm going to send my sources there and send this parallel bus there, but at some point I have to time align that, right? I've got to get that in time. Remember, you know, delay compensation in this situation is not going to work because it's I'll say almost all of the delay compensation models I know take care of that recorrection of time at the master bus, not at the channel level.
Got it. So they apply that.
So and until either one of those sources is applied to a master bus and exited through a master bus, they're not going to get time aligned. So you'd have to take care of some, you know, you have some challenges there to do that. So in that situation, I would suggest, well, just send the kick, snare, and toms through the group and make that the source of the kick, snare, and toms in the immersive, and then parallel compress the group on the channel. Right. So in that situation, let me get to an output here just to kind of show it. I haven't really set this up that way, but let's say this group that I'm showing you is our drum group. Well, of course, here you see the compressor and we have the percentage available there. So you could do very simple parallel compression there to do that, right?
Got it.
In the situation that we have today, I've gone ahead and set up, you know, a manually delay, like a New York style compression for the drum kit here, where we have the drums going up to the immersive as a stereo set. Okay, so I have kick, snare, and toms panned out and placed in stereo, and that is our source drums going up to the immersive. And then I'm going to have a stereo return that is the compressed version that goes up there, and align those two. I'm going to time align those two with the onboard delays to make sure they're in phase, and then place them in the immersive. So you have it just like you would normally have it, where you have compression, EQ, etc. Now, if you wanted to not deal with stereo there, then I would do it as two sets of parallel compression, meaning I would have my toms, which I might space out a little bit, and have one parallel compression return just for the toms.
Sure.
And then I would have an individual element for the kick and snare so that they are only coming out of the center array of the PA system.
Got it.
Right. So you can kind of do it two ways. I kind of took the easy path today just to be able to show it, but you want me to just kind of pull that up here?
Yeah, let's go for it. Let's take a listen to this.
Let's go for it.
And while you get that going, so today Robert is using the beta release of the next version of Eliza, which has in it a binaural render of the soundscape. So If we pop up the Eliza controller, there it is, voila, magic. You'll see a kind of a circular layout that would represent the field of hearing, I guess we would say, for the engineer. Field of view is kind of the wrong word. All around, and you'll see there is a bunch of colored objects. Those represent all the different sends from the console, or channels of audio, or objects now. And what we're actually listening to, if you put your headphones on, is the binaural render of that at home.
I've got a left-right of the drums, and that represents the panning of the tom-toms as well as the kick and snare up the center. And then I've got a compressed version of that here. And matter of fact, I'll pull this up so you can see this as well, just so you can see the processing that's on it. Stand by. So on my parallel comp, I've got a limiter in place on this drum, kick, snare, and toms. I've got a kind of a vintagey compression, some Pultec equalization, and then tape saturation. So that's the parallel compressed set that is going to get added to the source drums, right? All right, and I'll keep the effects off of it for a second, just so we can get a good sense of this. All right, so here is kick, snare, and toms going up there. And maybe, Scott, maybe you can expand on this if you want, but if you noticed, I have these two split out between the inside arrays. So really, I mean, in terms of its power element, its delivery element, this really isn't all that much different from a normal stereo PA system, right? Our drums are kind of stereo out of arrays. Let's call it, how do you want to designate these arrays? 2 and 3?
2 and 4, I guess, in this case. So you're thinking of a system that's got 5 arrays above the stage, and the first placement here is just adjacent center, right?
Right. Now, I mean, obviously, I could, you know, just place these in the center array if I wanted to do that. I obviously would close down the panning on the toms, but again, that's not necessarily a bad thing in my mind in immersive. I certainly in immersive, for whatever reason, I kind of take the Jeff Emmerich approach and say the drum kit is one instrument. You know, it's not 2 instruments, it's one, and where is it coming from? I'll try to support that. But if I wanted to put some width on this, as well as the width on maybe some overheads or things like that, then I would certainly do that. But I haven't done it here. All right, so there's our natural drums. Here's our compressed drums. And you can hear, you know, obviously big different frequencies, content, all the peak information is kind of shaved off of it. And then we add them together. It's very kind of natural, modern sounding drum sound, right? Put this in there.
Well, it's funny you say natural, and it's the sound that we're all accustomed to, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because that's what I mean by natural. It's the one we've been programmed to listen to.
Exactly. Right? So you kind of you talked about parallel compression, and I think the other aspect that makes me think about is effects, is reverb engines, is what do you do with those in immersive audio? Do you place a reverb in a stereo field? Do you put it with the object? What's the thought process here?
Well, you know, I mean, let's talk about the thought process of doing that to begin with, right? So in, you know, if we're working in the studio and we're recording in a space, let's say we're recording live instrumentation in a space, you know, one of the tricks to doing that and mixing it is using some of that spatial element in our mix, whether it's a close mic'd piano, we'll maybe use some far miking on a piano, or close mic'd of a drum kit, we'll use some distant miking of a drum kit and add those things in to give the spatial element in the mix and get it to sit. You know, I mean, that's really part of the secret of that. In live sound, you know, we don't necessarily have that option. You know, we don't have a lot of distant miking of instruments. Everything is close mic'd.
Sure.
So, you know, you have kind of 2 choices there. You can take the approach of, well, I would like to get my entire mix sitting in a space and present that to be able to take advantage of that kind of idea of getting it to sit right in the mix, or I can go down and create a snare reverb, create a guitar reverb, create a vocal reverb, and add those 2 things in. One of the things in stereo, almost always in stereo, we will do the latter of those 2 things. We'll have a drum reverb, we'll have a snare, you know, a guitar reverb, a vocal reverb, and add those things in. And because most of those things are stereo processing, if we want it to be, and we add those in and they reinforce the stereo field. In immersive, we have kind of the best of both worlds there, right? Where, you know, and you can talk about it here, I think, with the reverb engine that is in Elisa here. To me, it is just an incredible asset to have this at your hands, where in the spatializer, you can create space on the the close mic'd instruments, the close mic'd objects that you're sending up into it, and truly give it that sense of depth, right?
Sure.
I mean, it is the magic, certainly, for doing pops and Philharmonic, but it's also very effective, at least I've found it so far, very effective in immersive as well, is to take instrumentation that is close mic'd and just push it back into that space a little bit, and all of a sudden they just start to sit and blend a little better than they would with everything front and dry, right? So maybe Scott, maybe just talk a little bit about the reverb processor in the unit.
And I think that's great. So the Elisa processor, right, 96 inputs, and the reverb engine, i.e. the room engine in Elisa, actually sends uniquely to the room engine for each of those 96 objects based on their position. So it actually creates a room sound that you can define. You can define the dimension, the space, the EQ characteristics for that, but it ultimately gets driven from the position of the object and the distance. So as you grab this drum send and you push it backwards, it's going to activate more and more and more of that drive to the room based on that parameter. So it becomes a mix asset for you, which is really quite interesting. If we go into the reverb engine, we see what looks like a pretty typical reverb settings, right, for the room engine here. We see, early and late reflections. We see time, EQ, and spatial information. That's probably the newer one. And one of the fun things we can do is think about this as your original object wherever it exists in your space, whether it's in front or back. And you can gain shape and say, I would like the reflections. I would like the room sound to be on one side of the space. And you can actually have it all come from behind or opposite the object. So if you want to make that Catholic cathedral sound, you surely can, right? Or you can say, hey, I really want to reinforce where the object is on stage, right, where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And you can do the same thing with the early reflections. You can give them width or have them be very closely defined. And that really helps focus your attention on an object or makes it a bigger sounding space. We can actually do the same thing even with time. We can delay shape, so we can add time. So the reflections coming out of the speakers opposite the object are magnitude or multiplied in time of their exit. But one thing we always do in the Elisa reverb or room engine, is we ensure that the reflection or the reverberant energy exits after the sound originally gets there. So once you have your speaker layout put in, you hear the snare on stage. If there was a speaker in the back of the venue, you would never hear that room sound out of that speaker before you would hear the direct sound from stage. So you always still maintain that spatial information. That's handled automatically. So the way
super important there.
Yeah, and you normally have to do that manually now, right? If you go, hey, I want to do a room sound, you'd have to do that in a manual way at this point, right? You'd have to put 200 milliseconds on the output of your processor to the back speakers. So that's a really cool parameter. The last thing you can do here that's kind of fun is you can define the amount of room activation if the object is fully forward. So fully forward in this case is perfectly dry. There's no room energy on that object. And if you push that object backwards, it activates more and more of it. So you can define the dry-wet ratio based on the distance of the object. So you can say, hey, everything in front's going to have, 10%. Right? So you can just give it a little bit of X amount here. So there's just a little bit of room on everything, but if you go further back, there becomes more, and you can set those limits. So that becomes quite fun. And here you can set the linearity of that curve, which can get interesting. So it quickly activates the room, just going back a little few percent. So that's the drive through that.
So we should hear that. In this mix that I put together here, I've actually taken instrumentation and pushed it back
quite
away
far
from the drums a little bit. But I mean, even with the drums, we could hear that here. I could just throw up the drums into the
absolutely
processor here, and we could just push them back. Get me back on the there. But obviously, you can hear it's very dry there. Make sure I'm on the right thing here. So obviously that's the entire drum kit getting reverb, but my point of bringing it up, I think, is I use this as a mix tool to push things back just a little bit and get them to sit in a more natural space. And this is actually even a little longer than the room that I would probably use for a pop rock mix.
Sure.
I would even take this down even farther.
One of the other interesting aspects of this is that when you push the object back, you're attenuating it. You're actually turning it down in amplitude, and we have a high frequency roll off because as something gets further away, it gets a little bit duller. Right? You can turn those processing parameters on and off per object. So you can use purely the distance as a drive to the room engine as well. So you can say, oh, this is an orchestral show. I really want to use that distance parameter to help make people feel like it's further away. Or you can use it as much more of an effects engine and just use it as a drive parameter as distance. So those are both definable features per object. So that might be more important for some shows and less important for others.
Yeah, I think over time, the more I mix into this processor and make use of that, I'll really get that dialed in to be a really useful tool to get a mix and instrumentation to just sit better with each other.
I think though you were talking about the studio before, and there are sounds that are iconic that aren't necessarily natural. I mean, maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but I think of a certain snare plate or a verb sound that isn't necessarily representing a physical space that you can imagine, but just as a sound or effect. How do we manage that now?
In no way, shape, or form is that. And, again, that kind of comes back to this Western music programming that we've experienced over 50 years. I don't even know when this started, probably in the mid-'70s, maybe later. This concept of putting up room mics on a drum kit and heavily compressing and EQing those and printing them sometimes to tape to get some more squash out of it. And that being a primary source of the drum sound, well, you're not going to be able to create that in a natural space. That's taking a recording of a natural space and really doing something to it to get your drum sound to be a certain thing. So, anytime we're going to do something like that, that almost has to be done at the console, and we, luckily in digital these days, we can actually do some pretty solid emulations of that concept because we're so, rich in processors. We can dynamically go after those processors. We can pull up a reverb in a room. We can compress it. We can tape saturate it to make it very similar to what you hear on record and get the same sort of effect, So the question then kind of becomes, well, okay, if we're in immersive, do I push that up as a stereo reverb, right? Or do I use a mono reverb that is doing that kind of thing? Do I simulate one mic in the room that I'm compressing and processing and adding to my stereo sound? And the thing I've found, certainly in immersive, is that I find myself using way more mono reverbs than I do stereo, where it's like I have the source and then I have this thing that I've added to it back here and it supports it in that one dimension, as opposed to this and then supporting it out here in an immersive system that is actually wider.
Sure.
It's like I'm not really trying to create space for that. I'm trying to create sound for it.
Sure.
And it's two different agendas there, So, I mean, I have two examples of that here on the kit where we can use a stereo room and plate versus a mono room and plate. And I'll just pull them up here so you can listen to them. I think you'll get a sense, hopefully, here of how they work here. So maybe let's go highlight those as well. Yeah, just highlight the. I think it's right on down the next 3-4 channels there.
There you go.
There you go. That's good. So you can kind of see. I haven't pushed the mono versions back here, but let's see here. We want this. So here, let's start in mono. We can hear some room there, right? And some plate now. And in the binaural, what you should be hearing is that drum kit kind of coming a little wider than center, but you hear this space that just happens right behind it, right? And that feels very coherent to me. There's something about that that I really, really like in terms of being able to get that to sit and read within other instrumentation. So here's stereo version of the exact same effect.
Oh wow, that's. So
you see, this is much more out here now, right? But the effects sound here now. They don't sound here.
Yeah, they sound like very unique aspects. They don't sound cohesive as much with the with your.
And the thing you're gonna.
I was just gonna say,
you're gonna find is that the reverb, you're gonna actually fight to hear that reverb a little more, because we're not necessarily in stereo. I'm gonna have other objects consuming that space where that reverb is gonna sit, right? Whereas when the reverb is here and the competing objects are out here, you're gonna read it way better here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was gonna say the same thing is that's not only a good or bad thing, but you also now have some artistic freedom with that, right? Like I could imagine,
oh, big time.
Like what I can do on a song now, I can completely change the soundscape just by going from, I don't know, a stereo plate and putting it here, and a stereo plate and putting it here, and it's a completely different sound, right?
Big time. Big time.
And not that
bigger than you could ever do in stereo there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not that it bothers me, but there's nothing worse to me than the same snare sound for 47 songs in a row. I mean, because
so you've been to one of my shows. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, listen, well, I guess we'll have to end it right here now.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
But no, I think that's great. And now, did you think, like, with a mono object, does the width change that aspect? Does it change that feeling at all? Does it enhance it? Does it hurt it? Is it just another tool for you?
No, that to me, that's the perfect place to use width. Right, is on that mono reverb or return, or that that mono plate return, and just widen it and give it a little more weight in its actual space.
Yeah, that's cool.
You follow me there? Does that make sense?
It totally does. Real quick here, I want to do something because it just clicked in my head. I watched you that you were turning the knobs on the console.
Yeah.
And I guess we kind of talked about this vaguely in the beginning, that we connected these two things, but we didn't just connect the audio.
That's correct. It's not just a matter of taking direct outputs on all of these channels, whether they're inputs or stems that back up there. But it's also an element of control here. And you can see that if Scott shows the venue window here, you can see the plug-in. I'll put on the sales hat for Avid here just for a second. We've recently changed our plug-in rack architecture a little bit, and are giving everyone, regardless of what size console you're on, whether you're on the smallest console or the biggest console, you have 400 plug-in slots available to you. Now, I mean, that sounds insane when you say it, but if we're talking about a big immersive environment where we might have 96 objects that we want to control from the console, well, that's 96 plugins dedicated to the L-Acoustics environment, right?
Yep.
So I've kind of done that here, where I've given everybody their own controller. So no matter what device I pull up, or what object I pull up, I should say, I have control of it right on the console. So it shows up here. Now, another aspect of it that we do now that I think is just fantastic for this is we have both pre-fader inserts as well as post-fader inserts.
Which is important.
Yeah, and in this situation, I always make the immersive plugin the last post-fader insert. So I still have all of my insert slots pre-fader that I want to use for any other plugins, and then just universally or globally across the board, the last post-fader plugin slot will be the immersive. Now, there's no audio going through the immersive plugin. Right. It's just strictly control, right? So I actually have control, as you just saw me do there. Maybe I'll do it again just to drive the point home here. I think we have this.
Which one you on there?
Right. I'm on mono drum plate. Oops, I'm sorry. I think I had a wrong button pushed here.
Right.
Yeah, there we go. So I can push that plate back into the space a little bit. I can also move it around. If I want to do it anywhere in the space, I can put it.
Well, what's fun too is this is bi-directional, right? So we can actually, you can control it from the console, or we can control it from the Elisa interface, and the data on the console is updated. Because
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you can use the Elisa overview as kind of a master overview of it, and still individually control and pan and place objects on the S6L.
Yeah, because we're kind of screen rich in mixing environment these days,
Yeah.
So it narrows your focus a little bit, where you can stay in control of these things on the console. Like, you can see the plug-in, you can see the placement on the console, etc., and do it right from your mixing environment, as opposed to having to come off, go to another computer, go to the Elisa controller to do these sorts of things. Now, it's not to say there's no work to be done there. You still have tons of work to do in Elisa to kind of get one of these shows up and going. But it's nice having that kind of control sitting right at your fingertips in the mix position, especially when you're placing things and getting things going, right?
Yeah, especially you throw up that fader, and right away you can put it in position as you want, and you don't have to be moving environments. And every time you move, it's just a switch brain, switch position, switch eyes.
It just makes the workflow so much more coherent, just cohesive
absolutely.
As you're doing things. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's really good, really good.
So let's see.
Right.
We've talked dynamics, we've talked effects. I guess what's left?
Maybe we should listen to some music.
Oh yeah, everyone's heard our voices enough. I do like the sound of my own voice. This is why I have 3 kids. More of me is a good thing. But yeah, let's take a listen.
Let's go back to. I'll just take a track from the top here, and you'll be able to hear. Let's see. Let's go here. Let's go here too. if I've done this right now, you'll be able to kind of hear some of the placements of everything. You know, keep in mind you're hearing it in binaural, so you know this may end up coming up a little wider than you might experience it live. Let's see here, speakers. This my inputs on here.
While you're doing that, though, I think the takeaway here on the use of binaural in this case is a great tool to build and prep your mix, to work on your programming, and all these aspects are things that you can do ahead of time in a pre-production space. You could do it at home, you could do it at rehearsals, and not have to have an arena with a PA in it. And that's definitely a challenge that exists, you know, in immersive, is how do you do this in a space that isn't the space you're in, right?
Yeah.
And so I
mean, to me, it's the extension of virtual sound check, right? I mean, to be able to do this kind of work ahead of time in a spatial environment, not just stereo. My gosh, what a huge, huge advantage. Because it's a lot of work, honestly, to kind of get things positioned and ready to go. Right. I mean, you wouldn't want to be under pressure having to do a lot of that to get it going. You know, I mean, there's some work to be done there.
And especially if it's a modern pop show, it's not like it's setting one scene and that's your show for the night. You're setting 14 or 17 or 23 different scenes. And oh, by the way, the video director wants this sound effect to fly in. You know, so.
Right. All right, let's see what we got here. Let's see what Mr. Knopfler has to say. Now, I want to give the disclaimer ahead of time. I did not mix this tour. I did not get to see this tour. I was very bummed I didn't get to see this show. I really, really wanted to see this show, but didn't get to see it. So I'm not pretending to be Mark Knopfler's mixer here by any stretch. It's just my interpretation and going at it here. So I hope I do him some respect here. So you can see in this that like some of the keyboards, etc., even these horns are pushed back into that space a little bit. And you don't really get a sense of it, I don't think, until you would take it off, and then you would really hear it, you know.
Bargains have been struck between the satin bows and their bells. Prehistoric garbage trucks got the city to themselves. Echoes and roars of dinosaurs, they all doing the monster mash. The taxis and all are only taking calls for cash. How it happened, it all took place so quick, and all I can do is hand it to you.
Right, right, so I'm sure you kind of get a sense of it there, you know, of kind of the spatial aspect of it.
Yeah.
Kind of where things are placed, not only left to right, but in the backside. And you know, I said this to Scott the other day, given that I didn't mix the tour, I kind of went and, you know, looked up some YouTube video from the tour so I could get kind of some sense of the placement of instruments on stage and try to mimic that a little bit with these positional placements, right?
So I'm looking at this this layout of this mix, and I see it's very much a frontal mix, what we would expect in an arena, in a theater, you know, what would be a traditional concert experience. And we talked earlier that not everything immersive has to be surround, but of course we could have surrounds. And I'm going to assume we're going to have to think a little differently about how we do that. You know, maybe we could like play something and move some stuff around back. Even in binaural, you can perceive that location, that movement quite nicely.
I mean, I think I would start it. You know, it's certainly a discussion that needs to happen. And you know, even when I was doing Rush in the late '80s, early '90s, and we were doing surround, so to speak.
Just pause for a second, Robert. I learned to ride my bike in the late '80s, so I'm just going to let you know that. Sorry, you're cooler than me. You mixed Rush. I rode a bicycle, right? So
that stings a little. I'm just going to tell you that stings a little. But you know, in that situation, you know, we were in big spaces. I mean, we were in big hockey arenas,
sure.
You know, small stadiums, and even in that environment, you know, trying to do things that had movement, do things in the back of the room, you know, it's a hard lesson in propagation very quickly.
And I think that's the point, right? You got to really think about what you put there, right?
Yeah, it's one thing to do it in EDM where there's no visual reference other than the DJ.
Yep.
And, you know, there's no performers on stage that are going to be potentially disrupted by their instrument coming back to them a half a second later,
right?
And where they hear it. So my point of bringing all this up is you have to be very discerning about what you put in the surround, even if it's in a church environment where you might have, you know, 1,000 people, 800 people. Even there, you have to be discerning with it. And if you do anything rhythmically in that surround, you just got to be really, really careful with it. So you can do things that are, I think you can get away with doing effects back there. You can do keyboards that are pads, symphony, strings, all of these things that are pretty loose in terms of their time. Yeah, they're temporal. Yeah. So I think you can get away with it. So, you know, maybe I would suggest that we do that here. Maybe we push.
Yeah, let me grab the keys
We'll
here.
go back to that.
Yeah.
Go back to that intro and maybe push the keys to the back of the room. You know, all the keyboards. Maybe. You got the group selected there. So.
Yeah. So what I've actually
organ, piano, and stuff.
Yeah, we've created a group for keys, which we could use, and obviously do something like pushing it backwards in the room, all as a unit. That's nice.
Yeah.
But we could also play with the pan, so I could just grab all of them and spin them around to the other side.
Right. So we'll just put those in the back of the room.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that while it's playing? That maybe.
Sure.
Maybe
I'll give it a go. It won't hurt anything.
Give it a sense of it in binaural. You know, it's not near as dramatic as sitting in the room, but you get a sense of it at least.
Perceive here, of course, is the temporal artifacts that would be an arena with the piano coming from that side of the room, right? And it's an easy thing to forget, especially if you're center of the room and you're equidistant from everything at mix. It's not so bad to you. It's interesting, but for the person sitting 20 millisecond from the surround speaker and 150 millisecond from the mains, it's going to be problematic for anything that is percussive based, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I probably wouldn't suggest putting the piano back there, but you could definitely get away with the strings. You get away with the organ pads.
Yeah, you know, an Avid S6L mixer, Lance Reynolds, who mixes for Alt J, they did a show in a stadium with surrounds with Eliza, and they found that they put the synths, the choirs, the strings, all that kind of stuff, and it was great because it really just built the experience. Of course, they had the ubiquitous helicopter. I mean, you can't have a surround show without a helicopter and a police car or siren. So it was an interesting experience, though, and we actually had the band come into a studio space and kind of showed them what they need to think about when it comes to putting stuff in surrounds. Like, hey guys, for this audience member here, this is the temporal effect of your mix. For the audience here, this is the temporal effect for your mix. And it was an eye-opening experience for them, right? To hear that, oh, if I put this bongo back there, here's what it's going to be like for these people. And that was a pretty interesting experience, for the band and the artists themselves to hear that.
Yeah, I'll give you a great couple of examples of that with Rush when I was doing them, because, like a lot of their music has arpeggios in it,
yep.
A lot of keyboard arpeggio. And there was a couple instances where I thought, that could be really cool in this surround. Let me put the arpeggio in this surround. And the only way it worked was if it was never stationary. Like if it was constantly moving, then it worked. But if
Sure.
it was stationary, it felt completely wrong and out of time. Really, and it's you get into dicey territory here because you're having to try to explain time and audio to musicians, right? And traveling through space, and those two things don't generally kind of go together very well. Because I remember at one point we were talking about doing some things in Neil's drum solo, where we were going to have things out in the surround, a lot of stuff happening, which we ended up happening, by the way. But there was a kind of a funny day with it, where the first day we tried it, where he was doing this tom thing, and I was putting all the echoes of it out in the surround,
Sure.
and it was really cool. I mean, it sounded really great. But he could hear them coming back to the stage,
And wildly out of time.
Wildly out of time. And he goes, wow, those seem really out of time. Is there anything you can do about the echo? Can you put some more delay on it? And I remember thinking, well, I was like, Neil, it's already coming to you late. I don't really think we want to delay it anymore. And what he ended up doing, which I thought was just brilliant. We were playing relatively the same sizes all the times, but he changed up the drum solo a little bit, where he would do this tom thing and wait for the echo, and then started to play against it,
Wow.
where he was playing against the surround. And it was just such a cool part of the show. But, it kind of drives home the point. It's like, okay, you got to understand what propagation is going to do to this audio heading back to the stage, right?
Sure.
So.
No, it's really, I think for me, I was lucky, I just made the joke about riding a bike, but I was lucky that I started really designing PA and sound systems when line source array was becoming the thing, right? So I didn't have to unlearn a habit that didn't make sense for the next segment of life. Robert, you practically, and I say practically, you invented virtual soundcheck and were a pioneer in digital consoles, right? And so you made that evolutionary jump from analog to digital, and not everyone did, right?
Yeah.
And I see this as that same kind of generational change of going from stereo bus mixing to object immersive mixing. To me, it's the same thing's going to happen. It's going to take years. It's going to have its ebbs and its flows. There's going to be successes and failures, right? But undoubtedly it's better. And when it's better, it's not just 3% better, it's 300% better.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a while for the whole world to embrace this. And I'm so excited talking to the people out there, you guys joining us, that are ready to embrace this and be the first people on this new wave.
Well, I think as an industry, and I see us guilty of this all the time, and honestly try to fight it all the time. We have a tendency to want to make everything like this, everything that's new versus old, a binaural argument. Right. Meaning it's either one or the other. It's like it's either digital or analog. I'm an analog guy or I'm a digital guy. Well, and it's like, why can't we have both? I don't understand why we can't have both. There are places that I need this technology. There are places that are very well served by this technology. Why can't we just use the right tool for the right job and have these incredible options available to us, right? Add to that the concept of, look, history and development never stands still. It's never a destination. We're never going to get to a place where we just say, that's good enough, we're going to stay there forever. That's just not the way it works. It's not the way the history of everything has ever worked. There is constantly a progression forward. And so I just see this as another big step forward, and I'm getting on that train. I don't want to sit on the train that is at the bus stop and just hanging out. I I want to be on the train that's moving forward.
Yeah, I'm
that's not to say we disrespect everything that's happened in the past.
No,
I'm not saying that
exactly
at all.
I've heard some of the most amazing shows in my life in a stereo PA. Right? There's
a
million ways. Yeah, there's a million ways that you can be entertained. You can be, you can feel that show, you can hear that show, and all these things, right? But if we can give artists on stage, if we can give sound engineers, sound designers, if we can give creative individuals a new and enhanced palette for their endeavors, like, why do you not want it, right? Like at that point.
I mean, I've said this at a couple seminars too. It is as a live sound guy, and somebody who's been in it a long time. It is just so exciting for me to be able to think now. I can have the PA system design be part of my creativity for the show.
Yep.
I'm not stopped at the console and everything that's coming into it down to this 2-channel thing that's going to head out. That's not the stopping point anymore. I can be really creative with how a speaker system is deployed, how I'm sending instruments to that PA system, etc. I mean, come on, man. If you can't be enticed by that, boy.
I'm really looking forward to it. I cannot wait to get back to going to hear you mix, to hear others mix, to be at a show, be with 10,000 of my closest friends. I see the end of the tunnel here soon. In the meantime, obviously, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Robert, I want to thank you for taking the time.
Of course, man. It was totally my pleasure. I mean, I just love working with you guys. Scott, I don't mean to make it a love fest, but I love hanging out with you. I mean, you always get me thinking in specific ways that other people don't. So I really enjoy our time.
Well, thank you very much, Robert. Everyone at home, if you have questions, Robert and I should be able to answer them afterwards in the chat. Hopefully, as long as all works out well, we'll be there. If not, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. Robert, how can people find you? Are you do you Instagram? Do you Twitter?
Gosh, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can do, if you want to, you can do me at Twitter at 2 places. So it's either Robert Scovill at Twitter, all one word, or it's Eldon's Boy, ELDONSBOY at Twitter. So
cool.
You can do those. You can also reach me on LinkedIn if you need to.
There you go. Great. And obviously, you do quite regular online content as well. So everyone, if you haven't checked out Robert's stuff, please go ahead and do it. The Lab, you've done how many episodes now? Is it 400?
16. Oh, yes. Believe me, 16 feels like 400 in terms of preparation. So, but yeah, you can get to those. You can actually just go to robertscovill.com, and the sign up is there. It's a free thing that I just do. It's a really engaged set of people that show up to those things, and there's no time limits on them. There's no format. We just pick a topic and we start digging. So
that's great.
It's really fun. Speaking of that, this is going to be one of them at some point. So hang in there.
I can't wait. Everyone, thank you very much. Please have a great rest of your NAMM, and I can't wait to see you in person.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it.
Cheers.